Neglectful dad and evil stepmom tried to kick me out of my own house to give it to my spoiled, pregnant stepsister because her boyfriend left her and she is nothing. My M34, miserly, self-centered and usually absent dad, M62, has recently found out how much I'll earn, and shockingly so, he has decided to kick me out of my own house, all in the name of family. Ash, F29, my stepsister, and daddy's little gem who does nothing wrong ever, has magically gotten pregnant, and obviously, with her very self-reliant goals of being an escort and an OnlyFans model, she has trouble getting herself a place to stay. Now, daddy wants to fix everything, and I'm the fix. Unfortunately, I gotta give up my house and my hard-earned cash to this woman because she made all the wrong choices. Now, I'm the guy my dad openly rejected as a responsibility, multiple times. But ever since he found out about my new house, job and surprisingly, income as well, he's gotten pretty touchy about how we're the same blood. While I'm not quite excited about him frequently reminding me who my father is, he's also aiming to strengthen the bonds I have to his wife and her daughter. Granted, she's my dad's kid too, but I was cast away far too early to make any kind of connection with the woman. Glad I didn't, cause I'd be so disappointed. Before you all start, I just want to remind you all that I'm only here to vent out my emotions, okay? So I got opinions and thoughts and feelings to write out. They might not sound okay to you and you may disagree, but I'm just letting you know anyway cause frankly, I don't have anyone else to tell. Now, let's introduce Ash, short for Ashlyn, who's my half-sister. She's around 5 years younger than me, and she's making her dad proud. Literally, dad's delusional, cause this woman's out there, doing nothing but being an escort, sleeping around, with a flop OnlyFans. And my father calls her his pride. Yep, you read that right. I'm guessing he doesn't know the main deal. Who's gonna tell him? Now, I'm not very conservative, but I try to focus on my morals and career. I court women when I find time, to try and get to know them better. Sometimes there's a spark, but other factors come into play like long distance and availability issues. Other times there's no understanding at all. I try not to sleep with random people. I think I should wait for the right woman. Having a high body count grosses me out. I don't know why guys show it off like a medal. Disgusting. Anyway, this is what I apply to my own life. My stepsister is, sadly, the opposite in opinion. She probably has lost count of her physical partners. Then, she's an escort. Now, where that, in its own, disgusts me, there's also the fact that it's extremely dangerous too. Some guys like to do weird stuff to escorts. I don't know how anyone would think it's okay to work like that. Then, she uploads inappropriate videos and photos of herself on the internet to make money off it. And she doesn't get much success there. Probably doesn't know how to get the traffic running, but for whatever reason, it's a flop. How do I know of it? Here's an embarrassing narrative. My friend told me about it. Said Ash texted him one time after they met for a drink and asked him if he wanted to have fun. Now, hearing the story, I'd already heated up a bit cause the guy went out with my sister, but he said it was when he didn't know she was my sister. I don't know if he's telling the truth, but he said she'd sent him the link to her page and he showed it to me too. She's always broke and asking dad for money, so I think it isn't working too well for her. I couldn't bring myself to ask her about it directly and I never told dad of it either. Another time I saw her taking a call, and then sitting in the car with an elderly guy. He gave her flowers and they drove off. She would sneak back in the house through the window at odd hours. I noticed this when I used to come home from college for the holidays. I don't know if she's still at it though, but I don't want to be a part of any of it. I have a respected post where I work, and I'm happy about it. Finally, I haven't lived much with a new family, since my dad was bothered enough to send me away any chance he got, but I have seen Ash close enough to say that she takes after her mother, Marissa, F58. Marissa was, or she'd believe she was quite the icon in her prime. She used to be a flight attendant and was fairly attractive to womanizing males like my dad. Now she's a typical botched face Karen, if you know what I mean. She with her claw-like hands with nails longer than her lipstick, manages the neighborhood daycare of sorts. Weird how parents would leave their kids with Edward Scissorhands like that. She may poke out a child's eye with those long nails. Anyway, she's just as pokey as her nails. She has an opinion about everything, and loves to cause problems in other people's lives. She has a very bad voice, and has more plastic in her body than the ocean. She's as genuine as fake leather. She influences dad for the worst. She was, I believe, a major reason why my dad didn't think twice before sending me away to boarding school when I was 8, because she didn't want to raise a kid that wasn't her own. Now let me tell you about my dad. He's kind of the main problem in all this. Really, he thinks whatever he does in life is justified, even when it's far from it, because he's lived a whole life so he knows better. Says he regrets having me because I'm nothing like him. Thank God, I'm not. My mom was a strong woman. She knew her priorities well, and took good care of my dad, but they fell out. She used to tell me that dad wasn't a bad person, just a different person, and no matter what happens, he's always gonna be my dad, and I should never forget that. But, she was a good soul. She didn't want to poison my thoughts against my father. I'm sure he was as unbearable to her as he is today. They separated and divorced a few months later. I was 4 years old at the time, and then 2 months after the divorce, my dad married Marissa. They had Ash when I turned 5, and then my mom died in a car crash. I can't forget it because she was out to come get me from school. She had always been on time. Just once, she was 10 minutes late. To me, it seemed like an hour, but it was 10 minutes. She got hit at an intersection by a drunkard. He survived and she did not. He got a DUI in a few years, and I was left alone forever. I waited in school and it took them 2 hours to come and get me. I was lied to, and confused since my dad had come. I'll never forget his annoyance when he looked over at dead-face Marissa and asked what they should do about me, and she said, "Your kid, your problem." Precisely, Dad. Now you can't come and tell me I'll have to take care of your spoiled kid. I have a stable job, finally, and manage a few small businesses on the side. I've worked really hard since I turned 15 and have been earning since. After boarding school, I went to college, only visited during the holidays. So I've been out on my own since 8. I've put in a lot of effort to get where I am and recently bought a house. It's a nice little place. Much better than the shared apartment I had with my friend. It was a life goal I thought I'd never achieve. Thing is, I only just moved in last month. I may not like my family enough, but basic decency was to involve them in a moment this big. So, I invited them to the housewarming too. My dad's reaction was pretty sad to watch. He looked envious, to be honest, a little annoyed as he asked about the furniture, the architect and the interior designer. I told him what I thought was good enough info and he responded with taunts like I wouldn't know. You never bothered telling me. Trying to gain attention, making our weak relationship obvious in front of friends and work colleagues. Even my boss. A week passed and I got a call from him. I was at work and had this complex project to manage. He said he wanted to meet since it was urgent and I agreed. I went home and saw a very angry Marissa and swollen, red-eyed Ash giving me a side eye from the living room. Dad was in the kitchen, taking out bottles of beer from the fridge. He offered me one and I politely declined, worried what he'd say. I asked him what he'd wanted me for and he raised his brows and responded with another question. Asked me if I'd finally started giving a damn about us. I frowned in confusion because I didn't understand what he was getting at. He asked me to join Ash and Marissa in the living room. I nodded and went over to a couch across the two and sat down. Ash folded her arms and Marissa rolled her eyes. Dad walked in and sat with them, facing me. He put his beer bottle on the coffee table and leaned back. He then asked me if I were blind. There was a pause, confusion at my end, and anger at theirs, probably. Before I could respond, he added that it's either I'm blind or I choose not to see things that need to be seen. He said I had probably gotten very proud ever since I got a house and refused to look at the people who actually mean something to me. I sighed and asked him what he meant by all of that, and requested that he be more clear. He blew sarcastically and then told me I was unbothered by the serious situation in the room. He said that I chose not to see that the family was in jeopardy and I had decided not to offer to or be of any sort of help. Obviously, I asked him what jeopardy he was referring to. He looked over at Ash, who rolled her eyes and announced that she's pregnant. Like any normal person, I wanted to congratulate her, but before I could, she started crying. Marissa hugged her and told me I should know what's going on at home, that I should care enough to ask. Dad said Ash has just found out she's pregnant and the boy responsible has now broken up with her because of it. Marissa added that Ash has decided to keep it and that is what we should base further decisions on. All I could manage to say was, can she afford it? I got a death stare by both Ash and Marissa and honestly, I meant well. It was my concern. In my head, I had already assumed that maybe they want me to chip in with money to help her out, and I was genuinely ready to do that. But then Dad stood and walked over to my side and sat down with me. He then said that was why he'd called me. He said that he's a good father to his girl and maybe my mother didn't teach me how to be a good brother, but brothers would give their life away for the comfort of their sisters. I beg your effing pardon? I know my financial input is needed, but I'm not dying for her. I sighed and asked what he'd wanted me to do about it. He smiled and patted my back and said, that's my good boy. I gave a fake smile which got off my face the moment Dad spoke his next few words. You're giving your house to Ashlyn. No, I'm not. Yes, that's what I said immediately. Dad frowned. He asked me why not. So I told him that I could help out with some cash, but the house is mine. I can lend her a room without rent until she can manage to pay for it, and Dad stood from his seat and shouted nonsense. It makes perfect sense to me, Dad, but he insisted I not only give her the house, but also move out and buy another for myself. I argued that Ash couldn't even afford to pay the bills and manage the house if she's having a baby and unemployed. And Dad told me that those would also be my responsibility. Excuse me? Hell to the no. I was furious, but I had to remain respectful. So I got to my feet and told him that was not possible and that I would now be leaving. Then I left. He didn't stop there. He then showed up at my house a week later while I was at work. I don't know how he got inside, where he got the keys from, but when I came home, I saw men moving boxes outside the house. Boxes full of my stuff. I hurried inside as I asked them what they were doing, and they told me the house owner has ordered them to throw that stuff out. I shouted that I was the owner of the house and that they should get my stuff back inside and leave immediately. I lost my cool, but this was the last thing I'd expected to witness coming home too. I went inside to find Dad and Ash and they still stood there, demanding I do what brothers should do. I told them to leave but they didn't listen. So I told them I'd call the cops on them. That's when they finally left. They bad-mouthed me, using curses and whatnot. Now, I know this is a lot to read, but it was so much worse in person. A week has passed and I kind of feel bad about it, which is why I'm posting here. Was I wrong? I feel like they need me and I shouldn't cut them off like this, but I also feel like there are limits to what I'm okay doing for them. It angers me how disconnected and unbothered they were about me as I grew up, but now they expect me to lay my life for them. Bit much, don't you think? Let me know. I can't even involve my friends in this. You all are all I have right now. Update. Hey you all. I hope you all are well. Been a week since I posted and honestly, I didn't expect it'd get the attention it got. I read the comments as they came and some made me question a lot of things. But, soon enough I decided not to cut my family off entirely. This was because I received a call from Ash. She told me she wanted to meet me and I accepted it. She asked to meet at my house since she wanted to tell me a few things, but I was still recovering from the scene made last time. Therefore I insisted we meet somewhere else. We went to a coffee shop and she was pretty uneasy in the start. Normally she's pretty arrogant and rude, but she seemed pretty unlike herself. We sat in the corner and she told me she'd recently been broken up with. I responded saying I had an idea since Dad said that the guy who got her pregnant had left her. She shook her head and said that that's what Dad thinks. I asked her then what was it really, and she told me that Dad thinks her BF left her because he has commitment issues, but in reality, she's the one with the commitment issues. Shocking, right? She said that she really cared for this guy, but he'd found out about a few things in regards to her just a few days before she broke the pregnancy news to him. When they met, he'd wanted to confront her for those things, but she spoke first and that enraged him further. He got pretty crazy in that moment and put a hole in the wall. She said he scared her. Then he told her he was breaking up with her and left without hearing her response. She's been trying to call him constantly and he doesn't respond at all. He's only texted her back once saying that she needs to get rid of the kid first and let him know. Only then will he speak to her at all. But she has to get rid of the kid to get that chance. Now I know Ash ain't a saint, but this guy, I don't like this guy at all. I only asked her what those things were that he'd found out and she said it'd be weird to tell a brother about it. I kinda understood that she was probably referring to the OnlyFans and escorting, so I shrugged and said that it's okay if she doesn't want to tell me. Before I could speak to ask her what she'd wanted to meet me for, she drew in a deep breath and let it out. Then she told me that she'd been involved in shady things. I was worried as I didn't really want to hear the confirmation to all my suspicions. But I did. She told me that she'd wanted to paint and become an artist. But Marissa told her that it wouldn't fetch her a good life or money. Ash was told that she needed to find herself a man as soon as possible. Soon enough, she started gaining the attention of elderly men, which kinda grossed her out at first. When she told Marissa about it, she told Ash that that was a good thing. It was indeed the older men that knew what to do with the money they had, and that they were the ones making any money at all. Ash was only 19 at the time and Marissa told her college wouldn't or couldn't fetch her a good, comfortable life. Ash had youth, and there were many who would pay for that. Ash decided she wanted to become a model. She tried and went to many modeling agencies. None seemed to be interested in her. Then she met a guy in his 40s who told her he could get her a gig. He took her to parties and bought her expensive clothes and jewelry for the events, and she was happy until she was told about her first gig. Turns out, she was to sell her time to a man in exchange for a modeling gig. She thought it'd just be dinner, but it was a night, and she spent it. She did get a small modeling gig where she got to take photos for a small brand, but that was it. A few more men used her, while she hoped for a gig in return, but she'd be told that they didn't select her. She then found out that the guy investing in her was actually selling her. He was profiting off of her. She thought it unwise to confront him for it because she was afraid he'd have her killed. So, she told him that she didn't want to pursue modeling anymore and was okay with minimum wage jobs. Thankfully, he let her go without an issue. She then tried to wait tables at bars and it was pretty tough for her. That's what hard-earned cash is, Ash. But anyway, she also said that Marissa would humiliate her for choosing to do those small jobs. She'd tell her women are the beauty of this world and should only be there to shine and smile like a showpiece. They need to be taken good care of and so on. So, Ash started going out with men only for dinner, but she charged for it. She said there were many loners out there who just wanted conversation. But that too ended up with stalkers and obsessive men who thought they were owed more than what they'd paid for. She decided that talking to men making them feel connected to her was more problematic than sleeping with them, so she started escorting. It worked fine until a friend told her about OnlyFans. She tried to get it going, but she wasn't really good at handling a camera and editing things. She wasn't social enough and it required a lot of work, so that didn't work out either. And then she met her BF, who was an ex-coworker. He worked at a barista and they met again. She liked him a lot, but he was too clingy. He was a little possessive too and didn't trust her much. Granted, he had every reason to doubt her, because she was in fact still on OnlyFans and an escort. Without his knowledge, she stopped escorting and OnlyFans completely, and her BF started taking care of her with the little money he made and she was fine with it. Marissa wasn't though. But then she got pregnant and her BF found out everything. She said she has a few men on the list who could be potential fathers. They all chip in with money to support the kid and her. One of them had even proposed to her, but she knows all of them are doing it because they think they're the only one there is. Which is ridiculous since they know she's an escort, but she doesn't outrightly tell them that cause it pays her bills and would probably help with the kid. She said she decided to tell me all this because she couldn't tell Dad. And Dad thinks she's only been modeling here and they're making little money, and that she had one guy in her life who left her when he should have stayed. Marissa knows most of it, and suggests Ash marry the guy who proposed and let him think he's the father. But Ash doesn't know what to tell Dad then. Also, she doesn't want to marry the guy cause he's weird and old, and she doesn't want to let anyone believe a lie. I asked her what she wanted me to help with and she said that some financial input would be fine and she wants me to make up with Dad. She said that I should agree to what Dad's asking and then move out for some time. Then I could come back when matters aren't as heated. How's that a solution? I respectfully declined her offer and told her I could only contribute some cash, but I wasn't okay with moving out of my own house. She then told me I was selfish for thinking like that she exposed her whole life to me and I didn't have the least bit of decency to help her out even then. She said Dad was right about me and I deserved to be sent to an orphanage and not taken in when I needed a place to live. She got up and stomped away. I think my response wasn't too extreme. But, is it selfish? Really? What do you think of her side of the story? Does it justify her demands? Should I trust her? I feel like she was telling the truth. But does it mean I should do what she's asking for? Let me know, y'all. Update. This thing's picking at my brain at this point. Another week has passed and a few things happened. Thought I'd hit the keys and update y'all on it. Thanks for the support on my previous update, you guys. Such a relief to have people support my thoughts for once. Anyway, so after I met Ash, I got a call from Dad. He wanted to meet me at the bar and settle a few things. Curious, I agreed and went to meet him. We sat at the counter and he said that he knew how much I'm earning. I asked him why does it matter and he said he knew I could afford to buy another house in a few years. I shrugged and told him I already have a house and this discussion should seriously be put to an end. He insisted that I didn't have a family yet and it's harder for women to raise a child alone. That kid needs a safe space he can call home. So I reminded Dad that Ash has been living with them long enough and nothing seemed to be a problem. A little baby won't hurt. I also asked him what she would do living alone in a whole house when she's pregnant. I said she needed to be surrounded by people so that she can be taken care of. That's when Dad shocked me once again. He said he and Marissa would move in with Ash in my house. I couldn't believe my ears. Before I could react to that, the bartender let out a sarcastic chuckle. Dad took offense and asked him what was so funny to him. Ash, he replied. He said she uses everyone and then throws them away. My dad asked him if he knew who he was talking about, and he nodded, saying he was her boyfriend. My eyes widened. So this was the guy? Dad balled his fists and spoke sternly to the guy, asking him why he thought it was okay to start a family he couldn't support. The guy held his hands up and told Dad that he wasn't responsible for the family in question. Also, he had no interest in raising a child that was not his own. Dad dared him to explain why he thought that. He smiled and told us that he'd had a vasectomy done last year, because he didn't want any kids. But Ash still got pregnant. Also, he found her driving off with different men after lying to him about where she'd been going. Then he found out she had an OnlyFans. Said he didn't want to believe any of it when Ash finally told him they were having a baby. That was the last straw for him. He couldn't have a kid, so it confirmed it all. He told Ash that she'd been cheating on him all along and he knew, and she spilled the beans. All I could watch was Dad's face shifting from anger to shock to disappointment while my ears were pinned to the guy's voice. He shrugged and told us he owed Ash nothing. Rather, she owed him money, time, sincerity and at the very least, love. He said he didn't know if Dad knew any of it, but he was sure no dad would be proud of a kid like that. Dad tightened his lips and got off the stool without a word and walked away. Later that evening, he texted me telling me he had to go pick Marissa from her yoga class. I don't know what went on after that, but I'm sure it was something because the very next day, I found Ash at my door, crying. She told me I ruined everything. I pulled her inside to avoid a scene and calmed her down to tell her that I didn't tell Dad anything. It was her boyfriend who happened to be the bartender where Dad and I had gone. She then told me Dad told her to quit everything and stay at home. Said he was disgusted with her and never thought she'd resort to such practices. He told her to mend her ways and find a good man. Then he also pointed out that her chances to find good men were pretty slim now. I listened to her and hugged her. She said she was sorry for thinking it was me, because Dad had just come home from meeting me when he'd confronted her. I forgave her and then she went back home. While she was ranting and telling me about how pathetic she felt, she mentioned that Marissa was pretty quiet when Dad was talking about good women and their loyalty. Like she could say anything. Ash said, one of the things she can't speak about. I asked her what she meant by that and she said that Marissa couldn't have an opinion since she is yoga. I could only frown in confusion before Ash continued on with her crying as she narrated what else happened. Yoga? Stuck with me. What do y'all think really happened? Is Ash gonna be Dad's pride still? No one's contacted me ever since. I'm gonna see and let y'all know, though. I know y'all probably didn't expect me getting back to you so soon, but I couldn't help it. Update, just 2 days after my last upload, and I'm here. For the ones asking, Ash's ex's name is irrelevant, but we can call him Bob. Here's the new bit. So the day before yesterday, I went to meet Dad. I told him I'd decided a few things. I said that I'd wanted to help raise Ash's kid, and I was ready to lend a room to her. I would be okay to pay for the diapers and stuff, but she needs to get a job as soon as she can. Dad told me that then there'd be no one with a baby. So, Elle suggested she tried freelancing or working from home. Dad wasn't his usual rude self this time. He took a pause and then sighed. He sat down on the couch and told me he thought I'd hated him. He was right, but I asked him why he thought that. He said it was because Mom hated him too. I quickly told him she never told me that she always told me Dad loved me and cared about me. I told him that the only reason why I was disappointed at all was how wrong my perception of Dad was. Mom told me all that and then what I felt from Dad was total neglect and lack of care. He rubbed his eyes and told me he hated himself for a lot of things. Said he liked Mom but they hadn't known one another long enough to decide if they were actually each other's type. He sighed and said that he got her pregnant and that's why he had to marry her. She was a good wife to him but he never felt the spark between them. And then he met Marissa. When he said that, I could feel my insides tingling. I couldn't move. I didn't know any of this. Dad told me that Marissa sparked a flame in him he never knew he had. He was so happy with her. And before he knew, he caught feeling. Before he could navigate his way through rights and wrongs, he got Marissa pregnant too. And then he told Marissa it was wrong. But it was too late. She was pregnant. He told her to wait. He wanted to tell Mom first, but Marissa felt insecure and came to our house. She told Mom everything. Mom confronted Dad and he accepted it. It was a very ugly episode because Mom was extremely hurt. But even then, she was polite and asked Dad for a divorce. Y'all, my parents divorced cause Dad had an affair with my stepmom and got her pregnant. I don't know how worse this man could get. Dad took a pause and looked over at me. He said that he'd spent a nice year with Marissa when Mom died, and he had to bring me home. Marissa hated everything about it. She was, again, insecure that Dad might prioritize me over their baby somehow, because of guilt or whatever. So he sent me away to boarding school 3 years later, and then I never had to stay home long enough to cause Marissa any discomfort. Love makes you do stupid things, he said, and I wanted to punch this man in the face, but I controlled it. I turned around to see Marissa standing in the doorway, water bottle in hand. She said she was just leaving for the yoga class and she put her bottle on the table and went in the kitchen. I blinked and before I could think straight, she was back and went through the door. I was numb so I followed her out. I picked up her water bottle to return it to her. When I got out, she'd already gotten in her car and was driving off. I needed a drive to clear my mind, so I quietly sat in my car and drove, following her. She parked outside a yoga club and got out. She looked around herself and then started walking into an alley. She again looked around herself and got into another car. She hugged and kissed the driver and they drove off. I could hardly blink. I clenched my jaw and parked my car, got out and went inside the yoga club. Asked them about Marissa checking in and they denied giving me personal info. I said I was worried about her and insisted I was at least told if she were there. They told me they had no client with that name. I got back to my car and waited, and I don't know what came over me, but when that other car rolled in, I started making a video. A man got out and opened her door for her, hugged her and kissed her, then slapped her butt as she joyously made her way to the parking lot. So much for yoga, Marissa. Before she could get to the parking lot, I left. So, my dad cheated on my mom, and he's getting cheated on now. Karma. Dad has called me a few times but I didn't pick up. Gonna see what happens cause all I wanna do now is go and ask Marissa about it all. Should I? Update. Hey y'all. This is probably gonna be the last update, I think. And I know, it's a week late and y'all expected it to be sooner. But so much happened in this week. First, I actually managed to man up and go and confront Marissa. I went when Dad wasn't home. Ash was asleep. I asked her if she had yoga class that day. She said she had it every day, even on Sundays. She was in the kitchen, cooking pasta. I asked her who her yoga instructor was. She took a random name. I asked her if that were a dude. She said no and laughed. Why would I take a boy? She said. I told her it was funny that she had a female one when the club she went to didn't have any female instructor. She told me I was mistaken, but her voice was caught off guard and her hands weren't stirring the pasta sauce anymore. I told her I joined the club yesterday and that's what they told me. She asked me how I knew where her club was. I told her I followed her the last time I'd visited. She dropped a spoon. I picked it up and she turned around. What are you getting at? She asked me. So I told her what I saw. She denied it. As expected. I said I saw it with my own eyes. She shrugged and told me Dad would never believe me. I pulled out my phone and played the video and told her he'd believe his own eyes at least. She stood in shock and was speechless for a minute. Then her expressions calmed down and she continued to cook pasta. She said it didn't matter anymore. She was already planning for a divorce anyway. My eyes widened. This woman was despicable. Granted, my dad deserved all of it. But man, she's a snake. She told me that the guy she goes to meet at the club is her lover of 3 years now. They revived their romance when it was safe too. She said they'd fallen in love long ago but at that time, he was married to another woman, whose father had hired him in his company. A lot was at stake but Marissa and her lover decided that he'd choose to keep his marriage and settle his finances. Then he'd divorce his wife and get with Marissa. But Marissa got pregnant. So then, she was desperate to pin a guy down for support, as women should. That's how she decided to keep Dad. They were seeing each other off and on but then Marissa met her lover and got pregnant. So, she chose Dad, and told him he had to do something about it. Said he got cold feet so she had to take it in her own hands and that's when she spoke to Mom. Now, her lover is a widower and owns a company. She's good to go. She said, women need to do what they can, kid, and turned around with a smile. But her smile froze as she looked over my shoulder. Her smile was gone in the next moment. I turned around to find Dad in the doorway, fists balled and eyes red. He was shaking. Well then, Dad woke Ash up and brought her to the kitchen. He asked her who her father was. She looked over at Marissa and shook her head. She told him she didn't care about blood because she always knew him to be her dad. He ran his fingers through his hair and paced the floor. Over the next 2 days, Marissa and Ash were told to leave his house. The divorce is in process. Ash and Marissa are staying at a shelter. Dad has asked me to find him a therapist, and he's apologized a lot since. I forgive him every time. As with Marissa, her lover didn't take her in. He denies having any contact with her. I have the proof and Marissa has begged me for it. She's even asked me to think of Ash and her pregnancy. What can I say? Marissa, your kid, your problem. What should I do? Delete the video? Or hand it over? We'll update in the comments sometime later. Thanks for being with me. For the suggestions and support. Means a lot.